Men, this topic matters because almost every man who has ever cared deeply for a woman has experienced this moment. She loses interest, pulls away, or treats him like he's replaceable, only to start missing him later. This shift doesn't happen by accident. It happens because of psychological contrast, emotional absence, and the sudden realization of value after access is removed. Women don't miss men simply because they were nice or available. They miss men when the emotional structure those men provided disappears. When a woman takes a man for granted, it's usually because his presence became predictable. His attention was constant, his availability guaranteed, and his emotional energy always on tap. Over time, this removes tension and appreciation. What was once valuable becomes background noise. She assumes he'll always be there, always understanding, always waiting. That assumption is what sets the stage for regret later. The moment a man changes his behavior without drama, without begging, without explanations, the dynamic shifts. Silence replaces reassurance. Absence replaces access. Calm detachment replaces emotional overinvestment. This creates psychological space, and in that space, reflection begins. She starts replaying moments, noticing what's missing, and comparing how she feels now to how she felt when he was present. This process is not about revenge or manipulation. It's about emotional consequence. People don't value what they never risk losing. When a man withdraws his emotional labor and self-respectfully steps back, the woman is forced to confront what she lost, not because he demanded recognition, but because his absence exposed his value. In this video, you'll understand how women begin missing a man they took for granted, why it happens internally, and what specific shifts trigger that realization. These insights will help you move with clarity, restraint, and confidence without chasing, explaining, or lowering yourself. 1. Emotional absence hits first men. The first moment a woman starts missing the man she took for granted is not when you post something online, not when you move on publicly, and not when you explain how she hurt you. It starts when your emotional presence disappears. Emotional absence is powerful because it removes the invisible support she relied on without realizing it. When you were consistently available, listening, reassuring, and emotionally steady, she leaned on that stability, even if she didn't consciously appreciate it. Once it's gone, the impact is immediate. At first, she may feel relief or neutrality. There's no conflict, no pressure, no need to respond. This phase often fools men into thinking they've been forgotten. In reality, this is the adjustment period. Her nervous system was used to your emotional availability. When that connection vanishes, her mind registers a gap, even if her ego hasn't acknowledged it yet. She begins noticing moments where she would normally reach out, vent, or seek validation, and you're no longer there. This absence creates internal discomfort. Humans are wired to notice loss more sharply than presence. What you gave consistently became invisible, but once removed, its value becomes clear. She may start checking her phone more often, revisiting old messages, or mentally replaying conversations. These are not conscious acts of longing at first. They are the mind trying to recalibrate to a new emotional reality. Importantly, this only works when your absence is clean. No angry messages, no dramatic exits, no emotional dumping. Silence paired with dignity creates contrast. When a man disappears without hostility, the woman is left alone with her thoughts instead of distracted by conflict. That quiet is where reflection grows. Emotional absence also removes validation. Many women don't realize how much they relied on a man's attention to feel desired, grounded, or emotionally supported. When that validation stops, self-questing begins. She wonders why you're quiet. She questions whether she misjudged your value. She starts to feel the loss before she names it. This is where most men fail. They break the silence too early, trying to speed up the process. Doing so restores comfort and removes tension, delaying the realization. Missing doesn't grow in comfort, it grows in contrast. The longer she sits with the emotional gap, the more significant it becomes. In short, emotional absence is the trigger. It initiates awareness, reflection, and emotional recalibration. This is the first step where being taken for granted turns into curiosity, then unease, and eventually longing. 2. Loss of access changes perception. Men, the second shift happens when a woman realizes she no longer has easy access to you. This is where perception begins to change. While emotional absence creates the initial gap, Loss of access makes that gap real. Access means availability, responsiveness, time, and attention. When those disappear, the mind reassesses value. People rarely value what is always accessible. Value is measured when access is limited. When you are always reachable, she subconsciously assumed control over your time and attention, not in a malicious way, but in a familiar one. You became part of her emotional environment, not a distinct presence. Once access is gone, she's forced to confront a new reality. You are no longer on standby. This realization disrupts comfort and challenges assumptions she held about your role in her life. This stage often triggers subtle checking behaviors. She may scroll through your social media, ask mutual friends about you, or look for signs of what you're doing. Not because she suddenly wants you back, but because uncertainty has replaced certainty. The mind dislikes unresolved narratives. She wants to understand why access ended and what that says about her place in your life. Now, loss of access also introduces competition in her mind. Even if no other woman is visible, the possibility exists. The moment she realizes you are no longer emotionally or physically available by default, she begins imagining that someone else may now have access. That imagined replacement intensifies awareness. Being taken for granted only works when exclusivity is assumed. Once that assumption breaks, value recalculates. Crucially, this shift is psychological, not performative. You don't need to show off or signal that you've moved on. Quiet distance creates more impact than visible displays. When a man removes access without explanation, the woman fills the silence with her own interpretations, often magnifying his value in the process. Many men sabotage this stage by re-engaging too soon or offering partial access. Occasional replies, emotional check-ins, or mixed signals soften the impact. Consistency is key. Loss of access must be complete enough to register. Half presence creates confusion without reflection. As access fades, respect grows. She begins to see you as someone with boundaries, self-direction, and independence. Those traits elevate perceived value. What once felt guaranteed now feels earned. This is when the emotional shift moves from noticing absence to questioning loss. This stage doesn't always produce immediate action. Missing often simmers quietly before surfacing. But internally, perception has changed. You are no longer taken for granted. You are reconsidered. 3, memory rewrites the story. Men, this is where things turn inward. Once emotional absence and loss of access settle in, the mind starts revisiting the past. Memory doesn't work like a recording. It edits. It reshapes. And when a woman begins missing a man she took for granted, memory slowly rewrites the story of who you were to her. At first, she remembers the frustrations. That's normal. The ego protects itself by focusing on what felt annoying, repetitive, or imperfect. But as time passes without new emotional input from you, those frustrations lose energy. The emotional charge fades. What replaces it are moments of comfort, laughter, safety, and reliability. The small things you did consistently start to stand out. This happens because the brain fills emotional gaps with familiarity. When you are no longer present, her mind searches for emotional anchors. You become one of them. She starts replaying old conversations, shared routines, inside jokes, and moments when you showed up without being asked. These memories gain weight because they contrast with your current absence. Importantly, she also begins comparing. Comparison is unavoidable. If she interacts with other men or dates casually, the differences become clearer. Traits she once overlooked. Patience, emotional steadiness, presence now feel rare. The absence sharpens contrast. What felt ordinary before now feels meaningful because it is missing. This is also where regret begins to form quietly. Not dramatic regret, but reflective regret. She starts asking herself if she underestimated you, if she misread your consistency as weakness, or if she assumed you would always be there. These questions don't always lead to immediate outreach, but they deepen emotional weight. Memory rewriting works best when you haven't poisoned the past. If your last interactions were calm, respectful, and grounded, her mind has clean material to work with. If the ending was chaotic or bitter, memory stays stuck in defense mode longer. That's why restraint at the end matters more than expression. Many men don't realize that silence allows memory to speak louder than words. When you stop trying to explain yourself, your actions become the narrative. The mind fills in the blanks in ways that often favor emotional safety and familiarity. This stage can take time. Some women move through it quickly, others need weeks or months. But once memory shifts, emotional gravity increases. You move from being a former presence to a meaningful absence. This is when missing becomes emotional rather than intellectual. She doesn't just think about you, she feels the space you used to occupy. 4. Ego resistance starts cracking. Men, this is the stage most people don't talk about, but it's one of the most powerful. When a woman takes a man for granted, ego plays a huge role. Ego tells her she made the right choice. Ego tells her she didn't lose anything important. Ego tells her she's in control. But ego can only hold that position as long as reality doesn't challenge it. Once emotional absence, loss of access, and memory rewriting are in place, ego starts feeling pressure. The mind can pretend, but the body and emotions notice patterns. She realizes she isn't as unaffected as she thought she'd be. That realization is uncomfortable. Ego doesn't like being wrong, especially about people. At first, resistance shows up as dismissal. She may tell herself you were replaceable or that the connection wasn't that deep. She may double down by staying busy or leaning into distractions. This isn't confidence, it's defense. When ego feels threatened, it avoids reflection. But avoidance has limits. Quiet moments expose truth. Late nights, slow mornings, or emotional dips create openings. That's when the ego starts cracking. She notices she still thinks about you. She notices emotional reactions when your name comes up. She notices that certain places, songs, or routines trigger memories. These reactions contradict the ego story. The crack deepens when she realizes you didn't chase, plead, or linger. Ego expects pursuits. It expects reassurance. When you deny it, that validation, the ego loses leverage. She can't frame you as weak or dependent. Instead, she's forced to see you as self-directed. That reframes the dynamic. This is where respect quietly returns. Not dramatic admiration, but internal respect. She sees that you walked away without trying to win or punish. That restraint reads as strength. Ego struggles with this because strength without hostility is hard to dismiss. At this point, missing you becomes personal. It's no longer just about comfort or familiarity. It touches identity. She questions how she assessed you, how she treated the connection, and whether she underestimated your value. These questions weaken ego defenses. Men often ruin this phase by resurfacing to seek clarity or closure. That gives ego relief. It confirms importance without consequence. When you stay grounded and silent, ego has no escape route. Reflection continues. This stage doesn't guarantee reconnection, but it guarantees recognition. She no longer sees you as someone who existed for her convenience. You become someone who chose himself. That shift changes emotional math. Once ego cracks, emotion has room to move. Missing you is no longer resisted. It's acknowledged. 5. Emotional comparison takes over men. This is where reality does the work for you. Once ego resistance weakens, the mind starts comparing experiences. This isn't deliberate. It happens naturally when someone loses a steady emotional reference point. You were that reference point. Even if she didn't appreciate it at the time, your presence created a baseline for how connection felt. When she interacts with other men, that baseline becomes the measuring stick. She notices differences in tone, consistency, patience, and emotional availability. Small things stand out. Someone responds slower. Someone listens less. Someone feels emotionally unpredictable. These aren't deal breakers on their own, but they accumulate. The comparison isn't about perfection. It's about emotional safety. Many women confuse emotional stability with boredom until it's gone. Once they experience inconsistency again, the calm you brought gains value. She starts realizing how much mental energy she saved when you were around. This is also where attraction changes form. Early attraction is often fueled by novelty and excitement. Emotional comparison brings depth. She begins associating you with ease rather than intensity. Ease becomes desirable after emotional fatigue sets in. What's important here is that you didn't compete. You didn't prove yourself. You allowed reality to speak. When men try to outshine replacements, they turn themselves into performers. When you remain absent and grounded, you become the standard others are measured against. She may catch herself defending you internally. When someone new disappoints her, your name surfaces without invitation. That's not obsession. That's emotional imprint. It means you left a mark that wasn't fully processed at the time. Comparison also triggers regret in subtle ways. She doesn't regret leaving. She regrets how lightly she treated something solid. There's a difference. That distinction matters because it keeps dignity intact on both sides. Men often misinterpret this phase and break silence with casual messages. That interrupts the process. The comparison weakens because you become present again, removing contrast. Emotional weight needs distance to mature. At this stage, missing you becomes layered. It's not just about what you were, but what you represented. Consistency, calm, reliability, emotional presence. These qualities don't shout, but they echo over time. When comparison takes over, she starts seeing you not as a past option, but as a lost reference point. That's powerful. It reframes your value without you lifting a finger. This is when thoughts of reaching out begin forming, even if she doesn't act yet. The idea enters because emotional math is changing. 6. Regret turns quiet and personal. Men, this stage is misunderstood because it doesn't look dramatic. There are no public confessions, no emotional outbursts, no sudden vulnerability. Regret here is internal, it's private. And because it's private, it's real. When a woman begins to miss a man she took for granted, regret doesn't come from losing him alone. It comes from recognizing her role in the loss. That realization doesn't announce itself. It settles in slowly. She starts replaying moments where she dismissed effort, delayed appreciation, or assumed you'd always be there. This isn't guilt in the loud sense. It's discomfort, a sense that something meaningful slipped away without proper respect. That feeling sits quietly in the background, surfacing during reflective moments. Regret becomes personal when she notices that you didn't collapse after leaving. You didn't spiral publicly. You didn't campaign for sympathy. That absence of chaos challenges her expectations. She expected emotional aftermath. She expected proof that she mattered more. Instead, she sees composure. That composure forces introspection. If you were able to move forward with dignity, then maybe the dynamic wasn't as one-sided as she believed. That realization stings. It reframes the narrative she used to justify taking you lightly. At this point, regret is no longer about you being gone. It's about how she showed up. She questions whether she valued stability too late, whether she misread strength as availability, whether comfort made her careless. Men sabotage this stage by trying to extract apologies or validation. That relieves her internal tension. When you don't demand acknowledgement, regret deepens. It stays unresolved. And unresolved regret carries emotional weight. This phase often includes subtle monitoring. She checks your energy from a distance. She notices changes in your demeanor, lifestyle, or boundaries. Growth amplifies regret. Stagnation weakens it. What makes this stage powerful is that regret isn't tied to reconciliation. It's tied to awareness. Even if she never reaches out, her perception of you permanently shifts. You are no longer someone she could take for granted. You become someone she recognizes as solid and rare. This is where many men misunderstand the process and rush to reappear. They think regret means readiness. It doesn't. It means reflection. And reflection needs space to complete. When regret stays quiet, it matures. It turns into respect. Respect turns into longing. Longing doesn't beg, it waits. 7. Desire rebuilds. Through distance men, desire doesn't disappear when a woman takes you for granted. It gets buried under familiarity and emotional certainty. When you step away, that certainty collapses and desire has room to rebuild in a different form. Distance removes predictability. Without access to your energy, attention, or presence, the emotional system recalibrates. She can no longer assume your availability. That alone shifts attraction. Certainty dulls desire. Uncertainty reactivates it. This isn't about playing games. It's about allowing space to do what persuasion never could. When you're not there to reinforce connection, the mind fills the gap. Memory, imagination, and curiosity take over. She wonders how you are, what you're doing, and who you've become. Wonder is a gateway to desire. Desire also rebuilds when she realizes she no longer occupies the same emotional position in your life. That awareness changes the dynamic. When a man continues to orient himself around a woman who left, desire weakens. When he redirects his focus, desire grows because it signals self-respect. This phase often includes emotional pull without certainty. She feels drawn, but unsure whether acting on it is safe. That tension is important. It prevents impulsive contact and deepens emotional processing. Men often ruin this by trying to be approachable too soon. They soften their boundaries or re-enter casually. That collapses distance. Desire needs separation to sharpen. At this stage, missing you becomes physical and emotional. She feels your absence in moments where connection would normally exist. Shared habits lose their meaning. New experiences feel slightly hollow. That contrast intensifies desire. What's critical is that you're not waiting for this. Desire responds to independence. When your life continues to expand, her attraction isn't based on nostalgia alone. It's based on perceived growth. This is also where reach outs, if they happen, come from a different place. Not curiosity, not comfort, genuine pull. The tone is softer, less demanding, more aware. Even if she never reaches out, desire has been restructured. She no longer views you as a static part of her past. You become someone associated with growth, boundaries, and emotional presence. That imprint lasts. Distance doesn't guarantee reunion. It guarantees respect. And respect is the foundation of lasting attraction. Men, when a woman starts missing the man she took for granted, it isn't because he chased, explained, or tried to prove his worth. It happens because he stepped back and allowed reality to do the work. Absence stripped away familiarity. Silence exposed emotional weight. Distance forced reflection. What you need to understand is this. Missing someone doesn't begin with emotion. It begins with awareness. Awareness of what was stable. Awareness of what felt safe. Awareness of what quietly held things together. When those elements disappear, the mind searches for the source. That's when she finds you. This process is slow by design. It doesn't reward impatience. It rewards composure. The men who win here are the ones who didn't rush to be understood. They didn't beg for recognition. They trusted their presence had value even without validation. You were not taken for granted because you lacked worth. You were taken for granted because your consistency made things feel secure. Security is invisible until it's gone. When it disappears, it leaves a silence that speaks louder than arguments ever could. Whether she comes back or not is secondary. The primary outcome is self-respect. When you walk away with dignity, you reclaim control over your emotional position. That alone reshapes how you are perceived. If she returns, it's because she sees you differently. If she doesn't, you move forward stronger, clearer, and less willing to overextend for someone who hasn't earned it. The real power isn't in being missed. It's in becoming the man who no longer needs to be chased to know his value.